In the Mumbai News Center, I'm Sonal Bhutra and you're watching Power Breakfast. Well, those were the top headlines that we are tracking. But first up, as always, we'll take a look at the Asian markets. But before that, important flash that we saw on the screen right now, that Donald Trump has filed his presidential papers this time around for 2024. So that is something that we'll be watching out for. That's an important global headline. That is the update we are getting from Reuters. But if we take a look at what the Asian markets are doing right now, largely lower in trade, so to say, some green here and there. But that is on the Taiwanese index, that is up around 0.1%. Hang Seng is down 0.3%. We also have cuts coming in from Nikkei, which is down 0.6%. Kospi is down 1%, and they are not actually taking cues from the US markets, which did close in the green, and SGX Nifty, as a result of which, is indicating that the start for our own markets could be well in the red. It was down even more, but now those losses have been cut, so it's down 52 points right now at that 18,442 mark. Let's talk about the US markets then. Wall Street ended yesterday's session higher after a choppy session. The Dow Jones closed the session over 56 points higher. S&P 500 ended 0.9% higher, while the tech-heavy Nasdaq Composite led gains, closing nearly 1.5% higher. CNBC's Julia Booston gets us a wrap of all the action on Wall Street.
Stocks closed higher for the third day out of the last four. Today's buying was helped by another sign inflation may be slowing. Prices at the wholesale level were up less than expected last month. The Dow erased an afternoon loss to close almost 0.2% higher. The S&P ended with a gain of almost 1%. The Nasdaq finished almost 1.5% higher. A new filing today in the bankruptcy of crypto exchange FTX says it may have more than 1 million creditors, 10 times the original estimate. That indicates the fallout from the failure, which has already shaken confidence in cryptocurrencies, could be even bigger than originally feared. And be careful if you're offered a one-time discount to sign up for a store's credit card. Experts tell CNBC.com the interest rate on some of those cards is now more than 30%. That could cost you more than what you save with the discount month after month if you carry a balance. That's the action from the U.S. market. Back to you in Mumbai.
All right, that's the U.S. market action, but let's get you some important commentary on expectations of a pivot from the Federal Reserve, inflation, and the market trajectory.
The Fed is using lag data more seriously on the CPI index than the PPI index, but the danger was being too tight, not too loose. The Fed rhetoric, higher for longer, it really would guarantee a recession. I think this moves up the pivot. All we need is for them to recognize what prices on the ground are actually doing, and they are not going up. And the Fed can say, they're probably going to go 50 basis points, but that should be the absolute pause.
All right, let's do one thing. Let's cut across to CNBC. Donald Trump is addressing after filing paperwork for 2024 presidential run.
There's never been anything like it, this great movement of ours. Never been anything like it, and perhaps there will never be anything like it again. There's never been anything to compete with what we have all done. Ladies and gentlemen, distinguished guests, and my fellow citizens, America's comeback starts right now. Two years ago, when I left office, the United States stood ready for its golden age. Our nation was at the pinnacle of power, prosperity, and prestige, towering above all rivals, vanquishing all enemies, and striding into the future, confident and so strong. In 4 short years, everybody was doing great. Men, women, African Americans, Asian Americans, Hispanic Americans, everybody was thriving like never before. There was never a time like this. We turned the page on decades of globalist sellouts and one-sided trade deals, lifted millions out of poverty, and together we built the greatest economy in the history of the world. When the virus hit our shores, I took decisive action and saved lives and the U.S. economy. And by October of the same year, America was roaring back with the #1 fastest economic recovery ever recorded. How about that? All of the incoming administration and all they had to do was just sit back and watch. Inflation was non-existent. Our southern border was by far the strongest ever. And because the border was so tight, drugs were coming into our country at the lowest level in many, many years. Importantly, after decades of rising energy costs, the United States had finally attained the impossible dream of American energy independence, which soon would have turned into energy dominance. For the first time in memory, China was reeling and back on its heels. You've never seen that before, because the United States was outdoing them on every single front, and China was paying billions and billions of dollars in taxes and tariffs. The farmers know that because they got 28 billion of it. No president had ever sought or received $1 for our country from China until I came along, and we were getting hundreds of billions of dollars. Many people think that because of this, China played a very active role in the 2020 election. Just saying, just saying. Sure, that didn't happen. Instead of jobs and factories leaving America for China, they were, for the first time ever, leaving China for America. Businesses were pouring back because of our historic tax and regulation cuts, the biggest in both categories in history, bigger even than what Ronald Reagan was able to produce, and he produced a lot. China, Russia, Iran, and North Korea were in check and respected. They respected the United States, and quite honestly, they respected me. I knew them well. I knew them well. The vicious ISIS caliphate, which no president was able to conquer, was decimated by me and our great warriors in less than 3 weeks, and al-Baghdadi, its founder, was hunted down and killed. North Korea had not launched a single long-range missile since my summit with Chairman Kim Jong-un nearly 3 years before. We developed a relationship, and that's a good thing, not a bad thing. It's a good thing. Very good thing, actually, because look at what's happening today. My opponents made me out to be a warmonger and just a terrible person who would immediately go into war. They said during the 2016 campaign that if he becomes president, there will never be a war within weeks, and we will have wars like you've never seen before. It will happen immediately, and yet I've gone decades without a war, the first president to do it for that long a period. The world was at peace, America was prospering, and our country was on track for an amazing future, because I made big promises to the American people, and unlike other presidents, I kept my promises. I kept them. Thank you very much. Under our leadership, we were a great and glorious nation, something you haven't heard for quite a long period of time. We were a strong nation, and importantly, we were a free nation. But now we are a nation in decline. We are a failing nation. For millions of Americans, the past 2 years under Joe Biden have been a time of pain, hardship, anxiety, and despair. As we speak, inflation is the highest in over 50 years. gas prices have reached the highest levels in history and expect them to go much higher now that the strategic national reserves, which I filled up, have been virtually drained in order to keep gasoline prices lower just prior to the election.
All right, that's the word coming in from Donald Trump. He's filed his paperwork for 2024 presidential run, and a lot of that, what he spoke about as well. Well, we'll do one thing. We'll slip into a break now. Up next, we'll get you all that you need to know ahead of today's trading session. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, let's get in our research team. They're going to join us with what the trade setup looks like, the stocks that are likely to be in the news, and the action from the F&O space as well. This is our Power Prep segment. Let me go across to Vivek first up. Vivek, tell us, what is the market setup looking like today?
Well, good morning. It's largely positive set of cues. However, Asian markets today have taken it slightly on the chin with a muted opening. But let's have a look at how the global markets ended. Most of the U.S. markets ended the session with gains, with the S&P 500 gaining over 1% and the Nasdaq ending up over 1.5%. Now, on the back of this, you also saw a lot of the European markets also ending largely with a positive bias, not as strong as the U.S. markets. Coming closer to the gold prices actually ended higher by close to 0.5%. And also crude prices too actually saw a bit of a gain in yesterday's trading session on the back of a disruption as far as supplies were concerned. Coming closer to the dollar index continued its downtick closer to the 106.42 mark. As coming closer to the Indian markets, two key listings today, and that's something that the markets will keep a close eye on. Bikaji as well as Global Health, Medanta are the two companies that will list onto the exchanges and make their debut as far as the Indian stock markets are concerned. Asian markets are trending downwards with a negative tick, and also SGX Nifty, while at this point of time it is indicating a muted opening, it has recovered slightly from the morning lows that it witnessed.
Okay, it has recovered a tad bit. In fact, it's down just 32 points. A while back, it was down around 80 odd points. Well, that's about the market setup, but let's get in Surbhi. She'll talk about all the stocks that'll be in news today. Surbhi?
Few stocks that are on my radar. The first one is BEL, where the company signs 4 MOUs. The first one is with Yantra India. The second one is with SVC Tech Ventures, which is to manufacture and market heavy-duty blast doors. The third one is with Hindustan Shipyard Limited to capitalize on the emerging opportunities in the defense, non-defense and the export markets. And the fourth one is with Profense LNC to manufacture and market light weapons. Next is Hindustan Zinc and Vedanta. The board of Hindustan Zinc is going to consider a second interim dividend, and any dividend declared by Hindustan Zinc will be passed on to Vedanta shareholders. Next is Motherson Sumi Wiring, where the company will start trading ex-bonus today. The board had approved a bonus of 2 in the ratio of 2:5. And lastly, Sapphire Foods, where the lock-in period of the anchor investors expires today.
Okay, couple of stocks that will be in focus today. Surbhi, thank you so much for that list. And finally, Mangalam is joining in with a lot of cues from the F&O space. Hey, Mangalam.
A lot of cues indeed. We had the Nifty, towards the last hour of trade actually surge and close at above the 18,400 mark. It was the Nifty Bank which led the recovery in the second half itself. And now SGX Nifty is doing all things that it can this morning. At one point was down over 100 points, then recovered a tad, and now currently sitting with a cut of just about 40 odd points. The FIIs and the DIIs, both of them sold in the cash market yesterday, cumulative selling of close to around $100 million. But in index futures as well, there was not much action. The FIIs just bought about 110 odd crores. Both longs and shorts were added to the tune of 3,000 contracts, and as a result of which their longs were steady at 60%. What really took place was that there was a fair amount of short covering by call writers in the second half, and that's what accelerated the rally. Remember, yesterday we had spoken about how, the bears had written a lot of calls, and were the Nifty to sustain at high levels, there would be case of for short covering, and that's exactly what happened. 45,000 short call contracts were covered, and at the same time bulls went ahead and wrote 65,000 put contracts. So that's telling you that they are hoping for some support. Where were the calls covered? Well, 18,350 call shed about 10 lakh shares in open interest. 18,300 call also saw a fair amount of short covering. At the put level, we saw writing at the 18,400 and the 18,300 put, and here's where the crux is. The market yesterday did not give any follow-through to those who wrote the calls. Are we getting to see some follow-through for those who will write puts? It is important for the Nifty to hold between that 18,300 to 18,350 mark to prevent these put writers from going ahead and covering their short positions, because if they start to cover their short positions, the market can go lower. Three things we have to watch out for. The put call ratio is at 1.25, nearly around that 1.3, 1.4 mark. We see a bit of a topping for the market in the near term. We see India VIX, which is at a lower level. So is it factoring in complacency? And finally, we have 5 stocks in F&O ban. Delta Corp joins that list as well. So that is something we have to watch out for.
All right, okay, those are all the stocks in news, the action from the F&O space, market setup as well for you. Thanks a lot, guys, for joining us. With that, we'll slip into a break now. Up next, we'll get you the cues from the commodities market. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Still tuned into Power Breakfast on CNBC-TV18. Well, we got a lot of updates overnight in the global markets, and it has an impact on commodity as well. So let's get in Manisha Gupta, who's joining us with all those updates. Hey, Manisha, good morning.
Morning, Sonal. Thank you for that. Well, yes, we have seen a rebound come in for the energy markets. Crude, for one, is trading 3% higher in the overnight markets there. Well, a couple of factors there. One, the U.S. producer inflation is less than expected in the month of October. And then the oil supply to Hungary via the Druzhba pipeline has stopped due to lower pressure. Temporarily suspended is what we understand as per the media reports there. Also, the EU ban on Russian crude will start from 5th of December, and that will impact 1.1 million barrels per day. So there is just too much happening in the energy markets right now for people to go short. So we have seen the crude oil prices getting stuck in a range. It is between $92 to $98 a barrel that we have seen the crude prices trade for the last 2 weeks now. Gains have, though, continued in case of the metal prices here. So you have the steel prices now trading at a 4-week high. Iron ore prices have gained up by 17% in the month of November, and a bit of a profit taking in the base metal prices, but they're still trading on the higher side of the range. Markets are looking at the Chinese COVID cases on the rise and the factory output growth slowing down. That is what has impacted some profit taking in base metal prices.
Okay, all right. So a lot of action in the commodity markets. Manisha, thank you so much for joining us and getting us up to speed there. Moving on, in the fallout of the FTX collapse, which has the crypto universe on edge, ace investor and vice chairman of Berkshire Hathaway, Charlie Munger, speaking to CNBC's Becky Quick, said that cryptos are a combination of fraud and delusion and could be used for criminal activity. Listen in.
It pains me that in my own country, I see people that were once regarded as very reputable people helping these things exist, promoting their use and so forth. This is a very, very bad thing. The country did not need a currency that's good for kidnappers and so on.
What do you think happened? Because there are a lot of big names, a lot of people and firms that you might not have anticipated.
That's what depresses me. There are people who think they just got to be on every deal that's hot. And they don't care whether it's child prostitution or Bitcoin. If it's hot, they want to be on it. I think that's totally crazy. Reputation is very helpful in financial life. And to destroy your reputation by associating with scumballs and their scumball promotions is a huge mistake.
Do you think those companies did any due diligence, or what happened?
I think they actually mean well, though that you're seeing a lot of delusion. It's partly fraud and partly delusion. That's a bad combination. I don't like either fraud or delusion. And the delusion may be more extreme than the fraud.
Delusion, how so?
Nobody's going to bet a new thing that every 12-year-old kid can be a billionaire or something. He just calls it Munger coin. He starts trading it or something. It's crazy. It's demented.
All right, interesting commentary coming in there on the crypto world. With that, let's move on to get you an update on the big geopolitical news overnight. Russian-made missiles strike NATO member Poland late on Tuesday, killing 2 civilians. Polish President Andrzej Duda terms it an isolated incident, says his government doesn't yet know who fired the Russian-made missile, but the NATO is on standby. Meanwhile, US President Joe Biden has convened a meeting of G7 nations on the sidelines of the G20 summit. CNBC's Martin Soong gets us the latest.
So here's what we know so far. Apparently, President Joe Biden, who's here in Bali for the G20 summit, is convening a meeting of G7 leaders to talk about these strikes into Poland as well. We've got NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg is saying that he is convening an emergency meeting tonight in Paris to talk about any possible responses to it and NATO's options as well. And what we're talking about here is what's known as Article 5 for NATO, which states simply that an attack on one member constitutes an attack on all. And why I'm saying that is because Poland is a NATO member, don't forget. And I want to update you on the situation in Poland right now. Here's what we know. It started with reports that Poland confirmed 2 explosions, or rather explosions, in the eastern part of the country and very near the border with the Ukraine. That moved on to Poland confirming they were missiles, which developed into, okay, these missiles were Russian. Although what is still up in the air is who fired these Russian missiles. So that is still up in the air, and I think everybody's trying to figure that out. Although, again, to confirm, the missiles have been identified as Russian missiles here. And what this essentially means is this flurry of diplomatic activity is it basically has pushed this issue of the war in Ukraine front and center, as if it were not already high enough for G20 leaders here at the summit. And we've been talking about the scramble to get a joint communique done and dusted and signed off by all the G20 leaders by the conclusion of this meeting. This news potentially could harden the G20's position and push that deal across the line. Although the big thing to note here is that Russia, pretty obviously, is not likely at all to sign on to this joint communique. Neither, for that matter, is China, although China's position on Russia has hardened in recent weeks.
Okay, too many updates in the global markets. And with that, it's a wrap in this edition of Power Breakfast. Do stay tuned. All the morning action or the market action on Bazaar Morning Call that comes up next.